Be reading this morning a verse out of Romans chapter 8, verse 28, which says this. It says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose." It's a whole lot easier this morning for me to stand up here and talk to you about Jesus than it is for me to stand up here and talk to you about me. But I feel like that God wants me to share my story. I was saved at the age of 12. At least that's when I made my first profession of faith. I was at a revival service at Smyrna Baptist in Tipton County, and I walked down the aisle and I grabbed the preacher's hand, and Mom and Grandma cried. And that's the first time I really walked that aisle for Jesus. My senior year in high school, I surrendered to preach, and I went to Union University like all good Baptist preachers, and I studied religion there. Also studied physical education. When I graduated, I became a coach and a teacher, and also a bivocational pastor. I was married. I had 3 beautiful children. I was a pastor of a rural church for around 15 years. And when I first started, there was about 25 people there. Each year, shockingly, the church led the association in baptisms. The first year I was there, we baptized 60 some odd people, and the next year we baptized over 100. We were constantly in the top 10 church size by population in church growth in America, top 10%, and in the state of Tennessee in Southern Baptist Convention. Personally baptized 500 people in the time I was there, and our church grew from that 25 people to an apex of around 600, 700, 800 in small group and in worship service at this church. I was preaching on a local television show and gaining an audience, and people in the county knew my name. I was very privileged to start a youth camp, and the last year I was there, after 10 years of passion at youth camp, there were 200 teenagers, not including the adults that were there. Not only this, I was able to participate in drama programs, and we traveled the state of Tennessee putting on dramas, and we saw a lot of folks come to know Jesus through all of that. We even did a drama program at the Ruffin Theater and sold it out 3 straight nights. During this time, I was nominated for Who's Who 3 times. I was featured in 3 worldwide church magazines on church growth. I was even interviewed and talked about at Southern Seminary and the Billy Graham School of Evangelism in Louisville, Kentucky. I was a featured speaker at Union University and many other conferences and revivals. I was even able to meet the Vice President of the United States at that time and pray with him, and also with other dignitaries and politicians from Nashville, serving as chaplain of the day for the Tennessee State Assembly, praying over these lawmakers. God is good. God is good. And we lived happily ever after. Wow. Didn't happen that way, though, for me. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Happily ever after didn't happen. Instead, there was a great fall. And I remember about 5 years ago, pulling up in this guy's driveway, getting out of my truck and walking over to him as he reached out and he shook my hand and he said, "Man, I used to watch you on television every week." And I said, "Well, now I'm going to tell you the other side of the story. All things work together for the good." My earliest childhood memory was being raised on a farm with 3 women, my mom, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother. I can remember as a kid, they used to have one of those little organs where you play by number, and my cousin Kim would play the organ, and I had a little nightstand I pulled over, and I would pretend like I was a preacher, even taking up the offering, because all preachers have to do that. I even remember in my childhood watching my mother and father get married. That was a cool thing, I thought, to be able to go to school and brag about watching your mom and dad get married, because nobody got to see that, but I got to see that, But even though that was a cool thing to me, that wasn't such a cool thing to my mom. Not in the 1960s. sharing the family business was not something we did. And so I remember one day my mom telling me that she needed to talk to me, and she was going to talk to me, and my brothers were going to spend the night with someone else, and my mom pulled me aside and she said, "I hear you've been telling people that you saw us get married. You don't need to tell people that." And then she went on to explain why. She said, "I got pregnant when I was in high school, right after. And she said, your father is not really your father. Your father was named," and then she named the name of the man that was my father. And she said, "You were a mistake." Now, to a little kid, that means a lot. Because you see, I always thought anyway, and had already thought I was different, that I wasn't quite right, that something in me was not normal. And even though I know she didn't mean anything by that, she did not. I hold no malice against what she said. She simply said what was the fact. But to me, that embedded in my soul because it confirmed what I already knew. I was a mistake. I'm not meant to be. It confirmed that in me. I remember thinking as I was growing up that one day my real dad would drive up in the driveway, and he would, maybe he was a famous movie star or an athlete, and one day he's going to drive up and he's going to get out of that car and he's going to come over to me and he's going to fling a baseball glove at me and a ball, and we're going to play catch, And after it's over with, he's going to come up to me and he's going to hug me and he's going to say to me, he's going to say, "Wade, man, I've always loved you." But that day never came. At first, I wanted him to come, But as I grew older, I didn't. And as I grew older, I began to blame him for the reason I was what I was. I took my first drink of alcohol when I was 16 years old. It was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill. And I remember driving around and we was drinking that bottle of Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill, and after we got through with it, I was like, that wasn't much of that. So what? Then the next week I went out with a cousin of mine, and he had some old Charter 10. And he mixed it with some Coca-Cola, and I began to drink that old Charter 10. And as soon as that stuff hit my brain, I thought, this is exactly what I need. For the first time, I said, this must be what it's like to feel normal. This must be what it likes to feel the way everybody else feels, because suddenly I felt confident. Suddenly I could talk. It was like my whole brain became alive for the first time. And so I began to drink. I didn't drink every day. Drank every other weekend. I had a friend of mine that was quite a bit older than me, and he had a bar at his house. And so there were times after school I would just go over to his home, and I had open access to his bar, so I just go in there and I would drink as much as I want to. And so I would drink, and then I would go home, and I discovered that I had to hide the smell, so I used to take Hall's Menthol Liptus, hoping it would cover the stench of my drinking, Well, I did eventually get caught by my dad one time, and so after that I said, well, you know what, I can't quit drinking, so I went to vodka because I thought that vodka didn't have the smell that whiskey had. By this time I was drinking every weekend and many times during the week. We went to church sometimes. I wouldn't say that we were as faithful as some people might say we were. We would go sometimes. We camped a lot, and we rode motorcycles, and we went water skiing, and I grew up playing baseball. And so there was a lot of things that kept us out of church on Sunday mornings, But I believed in God. After all, I'd walked the aisle when I was 12, and I certainly didn't want to go to hell, I was just what I considered an all-American boy working at a grocery store, blonde hair. I had hair, believe it or not, back then, blue eyes. just, doing what all American kids do. And everybody around me was actually doing what I was doing too. At least I thought they were. The friends I hung around with was. Started dating a girl when I was in high school. And one day I found out that she thought she was pregnant. So that's the first time I cut a deal with God. Foxhole prayer. I remember getting on my knees and I said, God, please, God, don't do this. I will do anything if you'll just not make this be so. God, I will give my life to you. Well, I don't know if God took care of his end of the bargain, but I guess he did, because she wasn't pregnant. And the next thing I know, I was surrendering to preach. Because I thought at that time, if you're going to give your life to God, it means you got to be a preacher, because I didn't know any young folks living for God. So I was going to be a preacher. And I went around and I began to tell people, you know what, I gave my life to God. I'm going to be a preacher. And after all, I kind of thought I had to cut a good deal with God. Right? I mean, I was a senior in high school. I was going to have to look into a career. I thought about coaching. I thought about journalism. I thought about psychology. This would kind of cover it all, wouldn't it? I mean, I could preach. I could teach. And after all, you only had to work a couple hours a week. Preach on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and then the rest of the week can go play golf. Right? Hey, I had God over the barrel. I'd worked a great deal here. And so I decided to go tell my pastor at the church I was going to at the time. I was going to a Presbyterian church. So I went and I told my pastor, I said, I have been called to preach. And I'll never forget his words. He looked at me and he said, shouldn't you start coming to church first? Oh, well, I don't know. I didn't know that was a part of the deal. Anyway, my grandmother was going to a Baptist church. And I actually liked those Baptist preachers anyway. They were more hellfire, I like that. It kept my attention. They kept me away. So I went to a Baptist church that she went to, and the pastor there actually took me under his wing. And before you know it, I was a Baptist, and I was headed toward Union University, because that's where all Baptist preachers went. Now, throughout all this time, though, nothing I did was ever enough. I had a hole in my soul. You see, I'm not even so sure that the reason I was a preacher was not only to cut a deal with God to get out of a bad situation, but I'm not so sure I wasn't looking for something, to fill the emptiness that was inside me. I remember my first wife telling me one time, she said to me, nobody can love you because you refuse to be loved. I think that was true. You see, there was never enough love for me. I could listen to 100 people say that they love me and it wouldn't matter. I could hear one person criticize me and that stuck. I walked with that. I lived with that. There was a shame that was there. Now, when I went to Union, I didn't quit drinking. I still drank. It wasn't every day, but I still drank. I was learning at this time to pretend. You see, because when I came there was all these guys that were living for Jesus. I mean, they were young people who were actually living for Jesus. The only person I'd ever seen really live for Jesus was my grandma and some old folks at Smyrna Baptist. So I'm here and I'm actually seeing people read the Bible every day and study the Word of God and talk about Jesus and love Jesus. And I was like, man, that kind of blew me away. And what that did for me was it made me feel shame, because I knew I wasn't like them. It made me feel inadequate. I didn't measure up to what they were doing, but I tried. Lord knows that I tried, man. I got involved in jail ministry. I got involved in the ministerial association. I got involved in preaching on revival teams. I mean, I did everything I could to measure up, but it never was enough. I was a mistake. I wasn't meant to be. There was a hole in my soul. I knew I wasn't going to make it as a preacher. I remember my junior year thinking, one of these days I'm going to be discovered, so I might as well change my major. And so I went to my advisor and I signed up to also major in physical education. But there was a problem. You see, I wanted to please people. And back at home, there was a church full of folks that loved me, or at least were supporting me. And there was even an uncle or two that actually were sending me money because I was going to be a preacher. And there was a lot of folks I knew if I quit preaching, I was going to disappoint them. And I just didn't know if I could bear that. But there was also another problem, is that I would go and I would preach at revivals in college and people would respond. It amazed me. Why were people coming forward to be saved? Do they not know who I am? Can they not see through the mask? Can they not see that I'm just a pretender who's playing a game? Because inside I'm empty and I'm lonely and I'm isolated. I'm addicted to pornography. I'm addicted to alcohol. If they only knew who I was. And so I learned to become a hypocrite. You know what a hypocrite is? A hypocrite is not someone who sins. A hypocrite is someone who pretends that they don't. And I learned to pretend that I don't. I learned to hide my sin even more. I isolated. And all this did was build the shame inside me. I felt I was the only one who struggled. I lived the life of a hypocrite. I thought everybody but me. I knew what I was. My senior year in college, I met my first wife. Now, I still drank, but I hid it pretty well. My alcoholism was not in full bloom. I would binge. She would say things about, don't you think you drink too much? I mean, after all, you are a preacher. And I was like, well, you know, I do good things, so I think it's okay if I drink every now and then. After all, even Jesus drank wine, right? I could make all kinds of justifications for why I did what I did. And then sometimes I'd go over the edge and I'd make a promise that I would never, ever get that drunk again. I'd become a teacher and a coach. I was a high school baseball coach, and we had won a baseball championship. I had begun pastoring a small church at Fulton, and now I'd moved to Beaver Baptist Church. And when I moved there, I was still coaching and teaching. As I said, the first year I was there, we baptized 60. And what was amazing is you would think, finally, you've arrived, Wade. Finally, you can understand that your life is meaningful. Finally, you can see purpose in your life. I mean, after all, look at all the good things that's happened to you. We had just won a baseball state championship, the first time a Tipton County team had won a state championship in baseball. We had set a record for baptism. We had more baptisms and additions than any other churches combined. We had been featured in worldwide church magazines on church growth. We had built 3 buildings, hired several staff, and the church was continuing to grow, but it was still never enough. I remember one time, man, I had just baptized 25 in one service. The next week I came out and I preached a sermon, and after I preached that sermon, 2 people came forward. And so when they came forward, you know, after the service was over, I walked back into my office, and I can remember taking my notebook and just throwing it against the wall and saying, God, I'm sorry. God, I've disappointed you again. Because there wasn't enough people. Wasn't enough people coming forward. I had a cabin at the lake, and I would go there every other weekend or so alone. I wonder if people ever wonder why I went alone. And all I would do is drink, self-destruct. I remember one time when our church was really probably at its prime. I mean, there were so many people who were members. I remember one day, the only time I ever missed preaching at that church was a day that I was so sick at my stomach, I literally knew I couldn't get across to the pulpit. And so my house was right across from the church. And I watched, this is the first time I'd ever looked out my window and saw people coming in, because usually I was inside the church when people came in. And I watched as the parking lot filled. And I watched as people began to park on the road. And I watched as people began to pull up into my driveway and park into my yard. And I watched them grabbing their Bibles and walking into that church. And I said, oh God, if they only knew, God, please don't let them ever find out what I am. God, I don't know what I would do to disappoint so many people. Self-destructing, waiting on everything to crumble. God sends us prophets. I don't know how many people had come to our church preaching revivals, evangelists, and other pastors who I knew, who had warned me. Wade, I sense there's something wrong in your life. I sense that you don't have the peace that you ought to have. I sense that maybe there's a temptation out there. Maybe there's some woman or something that you're being tempted by. Whatever it is, man, you need to stand up. You need to stand strong. But I didn't listen after all. Look at what I was doing. Look what they were doing. Look at this big church I got, man. Look at me. I'm somebody, aren't I? Aren't I somebody? Haven't I done enough? Well, I began one time to hug a woman. That hug moves to kisses on the cheek, move to further and deeper stuff. And it led me into an affair. A few times I was almost caught, but I shrugged it off, denied it. Never verbalizing the lie, just acting shocked and then manipulating the situation. But from the day that I began the affair, I drank every day. Every day. The shame and all the stuff that I had inside me welled up that I could not live with myself anymore. Someone asked me one time, they said, when I was in a recovery group, they said, you drank to feel good. No, man, I quit drinking to feel good when I was in high school. I drank to feel nothing. So every night I would drink until I passed out. Now, I didn't drink when I was in a pulpit, and I didn't drink when I was at youth camp, and I didn't drink when I was on revival. But boy, if I wasn't, I was drinking. And at night, there was times whenever the day was over, whether it be 9 o'clock in the morning or whether it be 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, I was going to drink. And the only person who knew that was my ex-wife. She knew the drinking. She knew the pornography. She knew it all. Everybody else didn't know what she knew. And for years, our marriage had lost its respect and lost its love. And we were just playing a game, just walking through the game. Playing the game. There was actually a recovery house in Tipton County back in those days, led by Dr. Sid and Mr. Talley. It was called the House of Hope. It was actually a place where men went, and it was actually inpatient treatment, and they would go there for their alcoholism. Dr. Sid and Mr. Talley would ask me to come and to preach there. So I would go and I would talk to these alcoholics. Then after I would leave, I would reach under my seat and pull out my own vodka bottle and drink all the way home. I remember one time Dr. Sid came out to see me after I'd spoken, and he walked out and he said, Wade, he said, Doctor, he said, we're getting old, you know, and we want you and your church to take over this ministry. Little did he know he was about to hand the keys of his whole life's dream and ministry into the hands of an alcoholic. Finally, one night, I was drunk. Rumors had begun to swirl about the affair. I was laying on the couch. My ex-wife came in and she said to me, she said, I want to ask you a question. Are you having an affair? And though I denied it so many times, this time I was just drunk enough to tell the truth. And that was the beginning of the fall. or the real end, the exposure. Went to rehab, didn't work. Quit the church, went back to teaching, still didn't work. Still drinking. Finally, one day I was sick and I was laying in my bed. I missed school that day, and my ex-wife came in and she sat on the edge of the bed. She said, "I want a divorce." I've been so sick that day. I said, "Why don't you wait till tomorrow? Maybe I'll be dead." I thought maybe she was joking. You know, we had 3 kids. Come on. How you going to divorce me? But she did. And in what took years to build, that I actually hid behind, simply took days for it to crumble. She went to the deacons of the church because, after all, even though we weren't going to church there anymore, how could she explain how she was going to divorce the preacher who had done so much, had raised the largest church in that Tipton County had ever seen, except go and expose that to the deacons of the church? Boy, once that hit, the grapevine was active. Throughout the county, I was hearing the stories of what I'd done. I didn't even want to go to Walmart, man. I mean, after all, where was I going to go? My wife had asked me to leave, and so I left and went to stay with my mom, asking her, said, "Look, if you're going to divorce me, please don't let me be at school and all of a sudden I'm served divorce papers." I said, "Let's try to work this thing out." I would have done anything at that time to be near my kids. I said, "Let me just stay in the barn. Let me just live in the barn. I'll do whatever. I'll go back to rehab, whatever it takes." It was over. Let me say this, guys. When a woman's through with you, she's through. She's done. And she was done. You know, some people say that hate is the worst thing. Nope, apathy is. When you look at them and they don't care anymore. She didn't care. She didn't care what happened to me. She didn't care. Pulled up in the driveway, begging her, "Please, let me just stay in the shed. Let me just live here, whatever it takes." And she said, "Get out." And I said, I cannot leave my kid. Get out. I can't leave my kids. I'm calling the police. I don't care if you call the police. That was the first time I went to jail. I did say the first time, because I didn't learn my lesson. I'd pull up in that driveway, and every single time I'd go to jail. Don't think that doesn't get back to your school principal. He said, "Brother Wade," he didn't call me Brother Wade, he called me Coach. "Coach, the superintendent of schools is really wishing you would move on from here." I said, "Okay." So I bought me a 5th wheel camper and I moved to Pickwick. And after that, it was on. All the people that phoned me, all the people that claimed to love me, all the people that said they would always be there with me, there was nobody there. I moved to Nashville in my little camper and parked it in a campground and taught and lived in that camper for several years. When I look back upon that time in my life, man, it's all black and white. I don't see any color. The phone used to ring off the hook. Now nobody calls. People used to always be over the house. Now nobody knows even my name or who I am. Teaching in an inner city school in Nashville. I had lost every single thing. Do you not realize when your greatest fear is to be exposed, and you are exposed, how crushing that is? I now drink every night until I passed out. Every night. I didn't use porn as much anymore because I didn't care. I didn't want to think about women. I didn't want to think about anything but getting drunk. I don't know how I did it. I mean, I was teaching, coaching, basketball, baseball, and football, getting a master's degree, and still managed to get drunk every day, Mike. Crazy. Crazy. Like I said, the memories of those times are black and white. I drank harder than I've ever drank before. There was a brief moment of sobriety. And in that brief moment, I met my wife today, Deborah. Kept telling her, man, I'm a drunk. I'm an alcoholic, but I've been sober for a while. So she took a chance on me. She didn't realize. I had to import her from Canada. Nobody around here was going to touch me. I had to go out of the country, man. Get one of them mail order brides. But she came down and we got married, and she just didn't know. She just didn't know. If she talked to me about God, she was raised Catholic, and sometimes she'd try to get me in a conversation about God. I didn't want to hear about no God. I don't want to hear about it. She'd talk to me, well, what do you think? I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to talk about no God. I don't want to talk about God. We're not talking about God. One time we were in Canada, and her son offered me a beer. Well, I'd been sober now for over a year, so I was healed. Right? So I took that beer and I drank it, and the next week I bought a 6-pack and I drank it, and then we went to New Orleans and she made me a Caesar, and if you don't know what that is, don't ever find out, but I drank it, and that's the first time I drank hard alcohol. And it was on. I turned the Jekyll and Hyde. I became emotionally, physically abusive because there was nothing to hold me back. There was not even a thought of God. There was no accountability. There was nothing. You can come to my house today, and it's a testimony. It's a shrine of my violence when I drank. There are still holes in my doors and walls to where if she said the wrong thing, it was on. I drank harder than I ever drank before. And I determined at this time that this is the way I would die. And actually, I was okay with it. There was a African American pastor whose kid I taught in school. And we was talking about one time, and I told him that I used to be a pastor, and he asked me to come out and speak for him. And so I went out there to this church and I spoke. I really only did it for one reason. It was selfish. I did it because my kids had never really heard me preach. And I remember going up there and I remember grabbing that microphone, and I remember shaking when I spoke because I'd been so drunk the night before. And I preached, and then after I preached, out of gratitude for what he had done, for giving me that chance, I went to his church to visit him, to listen to him. And I heard him preach. And after that, I started trying to support him. So I attended his church services every now and then. And for a couple of years there, I went and attended that African American church. But I was still drinking. But I remember he preached a sermon on Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. And when he preached that sermon for the first time, I thought, well, maybe God can love me in spite of me. And so that was just sort of in the back of my mind. One night I'd been drinking really heavily, and Deborah and I got in a fight, and the fight became horrible. It was such a horrible fight, and it was so violent that she left the place and she went up to see my dad and mom because she had no place else to go because she had no family here. So she went up there. Now, at this time, my other two children, my oldest kids, didn't speak to me. They literally didn't. My daughter, who had been married, I got the invitation about 2 weeks before her wedding. She said, Daddy, if you want to come, you can come, but you're not giving me away. My only daughter got married, and I sat in the audience. They didn't speak to me because they knew what kind of person I was. But my youngest son, he wasn't raised in all the stuff. He didn't hear all the gossip. He didn't know all the things that had went on. And so he still came with me, and he still hung out with me. Little did I know that night that Deborah went up my mom and dad's house that Ben would be there. He never spent the night there, but he was there that night. Now at that time, I knew my marriage was over with Deb. She didn't care and I didn't care, and that was it. Whatever. So the next day when I received a call from my son, and he said, Daddy, I can't come up your house anymore if you're going to be drinking. He said, would you come to Pops' house and sit down with Pops and I? Whew, I did not want to do that. You got to understand, my dad, he's now 81. My mom don't know either, so I ain't going to ask her. He can still whoop my tail. It's amazing. Tough construction guy. Still climbing ladders and scaffolds to this day. Still cutting wood and digging ditches to this day. Man, he was not a guy that when you grew up, you crossed. I did not want to go up his house. He done told me many times, don't come up here. Don't come up here, you're going to be drinking. I've seen him throw chairs and grab grab pieces of wood at least, and say, don't you come up here drinking anymore. So I thought, man, after seeing Deborah and after all this, I don't want to go up there. You know, at that time, what I thought was, you know what, when Deb went up there, I thought, well, there goes my mom and dad. I won't get to go up their house anymore. But it never entered my mind to quit drinking. It never entered my mind to quit drinking. I didn't think I could. The only time I felt good, and the only time I made other people feel bad. But anyway, I said, well, for you, I'll come up there. So I drove up there in the driveway, and for the first time, when I got out of that car, I saw a look on my dad's face that I don't think I've ever seen before. He wasn't mad. He was done. And we sat in that kitchen out there in his shop, and he said, Wade, he said, I don't know what else to do with you. He said, you've fallen all the way. You've lost everything that at one time was special to you, and you still keep on. Now you're about to lose your wife. Now you're about to lose your only son that speaks to you. I don't know what else to say to you. He said, you told me a year ago that you were going to go see Clyde Mom, but you haven't went. I said, I'll go see him. No, you won't. How many times have I heard you just promise me? You ain't going to see nobody. I went back home, and Deb was there, and she said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go see Clyde Mall. No, you won't. No, you won't. How many times you made a promise? You ain't going to go see nobody. You're not going to do nothing. When you going to go see him? I said, I don't know, but I'm getting drunk right now. And I opened up my vodka, and I poured a big old glass full. So I only drank one glass a day. It was only about that big. It's not funny. It's sad. Next day, I got in my truck and I drove up Clyde Mall's. Pulled up in his driveway and got out of my truck, and he met me in the driveway. And he shook my hand. And he said to me, he said, I used to watch you on TV every week. And I said, well, now you're going to hear the other side of the story. And for the first time, I was honest with someone. I was honest with someone. And when we were through talking, after a couple of hours of sharing all of my junk and my garbage, all of my pain and my shame, we stood up, and he walked over there to me, and he wrapped his arms around me. And he hugged me up tight. And he said, Wade, I love you, brother. Wow. And it hit me. maybe if this sinful man can love me, maybe God can. Maybe the God who saw me as a baby, maybe the God who saw me grow up, maybe the God who saw all the pain and the hurt, just maybe I don't have to do anything but let him love me. Wow. Has anything changed now, Wade? How do we know you're not playing a game now? I don't know. I can say this. It's not fun standing up here saying this story. I'm trying my best to be honest. I try to trust God every day and to give whatever I have to him. Someone recently asked me, they said, do you think you were saved back then? Really, man? I mean, how could you be saved and do all that stuff? Because I believe that God was saving me. You see, the Bible says in Romans 8:28, the scripture I read just a moment ago, and we know that in all things God works for the good for those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. You mean all the good? What good, God, are you working in my life? It says it in verse 29, for those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness or the image of his Son. And all the things and all the drunkenness and all the jail and all the sex and all the perversion and all the pain and all the falling, somehow God, in all things, God was working somehow in the sin and the mire and the filth of Wade Wallace's life. God was working to make me more like Jesus. If he had to tear it all down, he tore it all down. And one thing that I've learned is that God will tear it all down because I am more important to God than my ministry. Do you understand that? I am more important to God than my ministry. I am more important to God than what God does through me, in a sense, or the works that I can do. He tore it all down. Now, he allowed it to be torn all down. He allowed me to be exposed because until I was exposed, until I came out of hiding, until I took off the fig leaf, he could not clothe me in the blood of his righteousness and his right standing. I've asked many times, why, God? Why not see other folks saved and delivered? Yet I've struggled so hard. Why did I have to go through this? I was talking to an addict that's here today a couple years ago. And I was like, he had actually went to my church at Beaver when I was there as pastor. And I was talking to him and I was like, man, I don't know why that, I did all those things really. And I don't know why I had to go through all that, brother. And he said something to me. He said, so you would be here talking to me now. Yeah, that's true. I go to a Celebrate Recovery here every Thursday night, and I meet with addicts and those who are going into recovery. Some of them just fresh out of jail. One guy was here the other night that just got out of 8 years of prison, and he was here for the first day out of jail, Trust me, when I was the big shot Baptist preacher, I wouldn't have been there in that room. But now I'm not the big shot Baptist preacher. I'm just a sinner saved by grace. Now I have to say this. I do not take lightly those who I've hurt. I do not take lightly those who I've let down. And I do not take lightly those who I've betrayed. Because I've left devastation like a tornado in some people's lives. I've tried to make amends to those I could. Some received it. Some rejected it. Some have, I couldn't make amends because, simply put, I knew I'd cause more damage than good if I tried. And others have already gone on to be with the Lord. So there's nothing I can do. Those regrets are the biggest regrets I have, the people that I've hurt. It's true. You know, the preacher said here, I think last week, said, you know what? God can give you back your ministry. God can give you back your talents. God can even restore your money. But you can never have your time restored. Oh, my God. Oh, my biggest regret. If I could only turn back time. If I could only go back and watch my baby walk. If I could only go back and be there at the ball games with my kids. If I could only turn back time. If I could only not hurt those I've hurt, those I've let down, and those I have betrayed. Sometimes it's overwhelming. The regrets. Maybe there are some of you today who you also feel inadequate. Maybe you feel like you're a mistake. Maybe you feel like you're not meant to be. You know, it's only when I begin to realize that it's not what I do for God that makes me right with God. It's what Jesus did for me upon the cross. And I see the grace of God. It's only when I come to that point that I begin to find peace and freedom. I remember a pastor, after I'd fallen, he came to me and he said, Wade, he said, you've lost your peace. I said, brother, I've never had peace. Today, I have more peace than I've ever had in my life. I have peace because I've trusted God, that God, you're in control. I can't do it. I can't do it. Maybe there are some of you today who feel like you've gone too far. No coming back for you. You just settled in and you said, this is the way it's going to be and this is how it's going to end. Do you realize that God can take your worst and He can use that to get glory? It's not fun to sit up here and tell you my dirty, dark secrets. I'd much rather stand up here and tell you how good a guy I am. Or preach to you about how you're going to go to hell if you don't get saved. But instead, I stand up here because I'm just hoping that Jesus is getting the glory. Because Wade Wallace should not be put on a pedestal, nor any other pastor. We're dirty, rotten sinners who need the grace of God every day. Today, you need to get honest with God first. Maybe you feel like today that you shouldn't go to church because church is for people that's got it all together. You're just not a church person. Well, I know one church you can come to because look at the preacher. You are welcome here, just as you are. You are welcome here. We're not going to make you dress like we dress, even though I look nice today. We're not going to make you be able to quote the Bible. We're not even going to make you pray in public, Ashley, anymore. Just come as you are and let Jesus do the work. Let Him do it. Surrender in Jesus' name. Will you stand with me?